Prof, we have already some people in the Zoom. You have to start.
Okay, start. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to everyone here in this room, and also to those who are joining us online on Zoom and also on YouTube. I welcome you to the Triology Seminar Series 12, 13, 14 on the futures of integration of human knowledge and civilizational development. The theme for these three seminars of triology is civilizational sustainability and challenges for education, divine guidance all through history. And we have a very eminent scholar with us here who is not a stranger or a foreigner to ISTAC. I'll introduce him in a minute. Just to mention here, he's a former Deputy Dean of ISTAC. So the topic today is civilizational sustainability and challenges for education through divine guidance all through history. And we have three topics. So this Friday today, and then the next lecture will be on Thursday afternoon next week on 11 May in the afternoon at 3 p.m. And the third lecture will be on 18 May at 3 p.m. also in this room. So the topic for today is beginning of human history and our worldview. Let me introduce our speaker for this morning. Is Professor Abdullah Al-Ahsan. He is former Professor of Comparative Civilization in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Istanbul Shahar University. Earlier, he has served at the International Islamic University, Malaysia, for nearly 30 years. He graduated from a very prestigious institute, that is McGill University, Institute of Islamic Studies, probably in Canada. And he did his PhD from University of also his graduate studies from University of Michigan in the United States, which is also a very prominent university in the United States. Professor Ahsan has contributed many articles on the relationship between contemporary Islamic and Western civilization. His works include the organization of Islamic Conference, Introduction to an Islamic Political Institution. He was the first one to write on OIC. That was in 1988. And this is how I came to know him first, through his book on the OIC, which is a very, very important book. Today, OIC has grown into a larger organization, and he has continued his work on that. I'll come to that, his second publication. And then he wrote a book, the Ummah or Nation Identity Crisis in Contemporary Muslim Society, which was published from London in 1992. He has edited, along with Stephen B. Young, Guidance for Good Governance, Explorations of Quranic, Scientific, and Cross-Cultural Approaches, published from IIUM in 2008 and 2013. His latest edition of book is Quranic Guidance for Good Governance, A Contemporary Perspective, which is published by Palgrave Macmillan. And his books and articles have also been translated into Arabic, Bengali, Bosnian, Turkish, and Urdu. So I present to you Professor Abdullah Ahsan, please.
Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Salatu Wassalam ala Rasulihil Karim. It's an honor and privilege to be here at ISTAC. I joined ISTAC in 2009, and I was Deputy Dean for a while, about a couple of years at ISTAC. And then, of course, all ISTAC staff were moved to the main campus. So I moved back to the main campus in 2014. ISTAC is very dear to me, and my wife always reminds me that she was one of the first students of ISTAC, and she did have a master's and PhD both from ISTAC. So it is a pleasure to be here at ISTAC. I'm grateful to Professor Barwood. When I told him that I plan to come for my personal reasons to Malaysia, he proposed that I deliver some talks at this class. And of course, lecturers love to lecture. So I just grabbed the opportunity, and Dr. Imtiyaz was very kind to coordinate the whole effort. So that is how I'm here. My teaching experience about 4 decades tells me that the fundamental problems that we encounter, of course, problems must be encountered and responded through education. What have I learned during the last 40 years? I want to share with you, and I want to make suggestions for the future. So this is the background. But of course, when one goes for analyzing the past, obviously you will choose certain aspects of, you cannot, as a student of history, you would know that, you have to be selective. You cannot really discuss everything. So I'm also being selective in saying this. Now, I chose this topic, and we go to the, how do I go to the subject?
Yeah.
No.
Sure.
Go to PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay. I have raised this question of worldview, because you see, worldview is the view that dominates our life. And I strongly feel that we have some fundamental problems in the worldview that we hold in general today. Of course, every individual has his or her own worldview. Yet we generalize. We have, sometimes we'll say Western worldview, sometimes we say Islamic worldview, we say, scientific worldview, all these worldviews we talk about. I am looking at the future, and therefore my focus is the future generation. After teaching both undergrad and graduate levels for decades, I feel that one course that should address common students should be Introduction to History and Civilizations. Now, the term civilization has become has been politicized by the class of civilizations thesis. You see, if you are following the world history, world politics, you will notice that 1989, 1990 was a period that circumstances changed, former Soviet Union collapsed, and new worldview in the name of so-called globalization came into focus. And during this time also, this class of civilizations thesis was produced. You see, until then, in fact, if you look at the history, you will find that middle of the 20th century was a period that world history kind of moved to a different direction. Nationalism came into focus in the 19th century in Europe. By the middle of the 20th century, nationalism was adopted in the Muslim world. And by the middle of the century, you will notice that under the banner of the United Nations, every nation had to be part of the United Nations. So world became kind of focused under the banner of the United Nations. No country could stay behind. If you have to travel outside of your nation state, you have to have a passport. This national identity became the main aspect development by the middle of the 20th century. And of course, the same time, you notice that there was a kind of division in the form of Cold War, a capitalist world and the socialist world was divided. And until 1989, 1990, till the collapse of the Soviet Union, this nation-state system dominated. The history curriculum in most countries was devoted to promote national identity. And through that kind of process, the division of the humanity became very serious. And that division dominates, although after the collapse of the Soviet Union, ideas like globalization came into focus. You will notice that globalization did not really integrate the world. It further divided the world. So I feel that this division of humanity is a disservice to history. And I want to address that question here. And that is the worldview that I want to focus on. But in this process, of course, naturally, questions like the relationship between science and religion comes as a very focal point. Why? Because religion has always been part and parcel of civilizations. No civilizations in history you can identify without a religion. Therefore, and of course, since the Enlightenment, since the 18th century, we have so-called developed some kind of scientific approach. As a result of that, we have this conflict between science and religion. So I want to address these two fundamental questions. One, the relationship between science and religion, and of course, unity of the mankind. And my focus in my talk will be in these two. And the division of mankind that you see is, in my opinion, became very focal with Darwinian view of man. Now, of course, I am going to discuss a little bit of Darwinian view of man, but that is not my focus. I am just pointing out to the impact that Darwin's view had on world history. And the impact was very, very serious. The kind of division of ideas that you see, particularly the racist the politics today, like white supremacy or Zionism or Hindutva, all these racist ideas developed based on Darwin's theory. And here, fundamental question that arises, which I don't think that our educational system has really categorically responded to, is the beginning of human history. The question that I'm raising here is whether human history began with one couple, as religious texts suggest, or human history began with the transformation of one species to another as a group. And this, I feel, that started with Darwinian view of man. So this view, I mean, I'm quoting this sentence directly from Darwin's Descent of Man, 1871 publication. Man is continuous with the animal kingdom and subject to the laws of nature. And therefore, you know that 19th century was deviating from the earlier Christian worldview and slowly subscribing to what they call secular. I have strong disagreement on the definition of secularism, yet I would say that this is how it has been described, that either you believe in God or you don't believe in God. And most people, those who do not believe in God, they think that they're free thinkers. They don't understand that not believing in God also is a faith. So this is kind of dilemma that they don't want to address. However, to me, this originated from his Darwinian view of man, and he says that mental, moral, and spiritual qualities evolved by precisely the same process that gave the eagle its claws and tapeworm its hooks. In other words, intervention of God in history is rejected. Although Darwin was a believer, he mentions in his work that he did believe in God, but that belief seems to me was only at the level of first creation or whatever you call it. Since then, he thinks that everything developed naturally. As a result of that, when you study history, this part of, how God created human beings, and particularly the sense of responsibility. When you talk about human being and role of human being on earth, you will, of course, come to discuss activities. What is the relationship between human activities and existence of God? And that is totally missing in Darwinian view. So this is an observation. You see, I'll just point it out to you that I'm teaching courses on Introduction to Civilization since mid-1990s. In fact, when the Class of Civilizations thesis was produced in the mid-1990s, Professor Abdullah assigned me to develop courses on rise and fall of civilizations. So I have been teaching courses on rise and fall of civilizations since then. As a result of that, I'm extremely grateful to him for exposing myself into that understanding of civilizations in history. What I find out in my studies of civilizations in history is that all civilizations in history are rooted in divine guidance, be it Hinduism, be it Chinese civilization, be it Greek civilization, be it Confucian, whatever it is. All civilizations are rooted in divine guidance. And of course, I'll talk more about religion in my next talk, but I'll just point it out is that problem with religion is that modern scholarship, particularly 19th century scholarship, understood or tried to understand religion from practices of followers, not from the original text of the religion. And that, of course, you can imagine, if you want to understand Islam from the practices of Muslims, what kind of Islam will you find? And this applies more on other religions, because in Islam, at least we have the book, textbook, in which all Muslims agree. But for other religions, there is no agreement on the first textbook. So these are some fundamental problems of our understanding that we have developed. So this observation by this author, this is a European history book. I mean, all the textbooks that I have consulted, mostly published in the United States, are followed all over the world. And here also, in this university also, I have followed some of those books. So Darwinism deprived them from the privilege of God's special creation. This idea of special creation is missing in Darwinism. Because Darwinism would say that human being was their natural process, in the same process that other species came into existence. And that is something very dangerous. Here, I would point out to George Sarton's work. I am not sure, you go to ISTAC library, I have used this text for George Sarton. And Sarton was, I mean, I think I first heard the name of George Sarton from my wife's classworks in the 90s. Introduction to Science, History of Introduction to Science. It is not a book on religion, but he makes an observation which is very profound. And that observation is that until the end of 18th century, theology was part of science. From the 19th century, theology was rejected from science. And that is why I see the main problem, that knowledge that we have inherited from Europe, all these subjects that we study in the universities today, psychology, sociology, political science, or anthropology, or law, or economics, all these subjects are product of 19th century Europe. And all these subjects have this problem of origin of knowledge. So theology was rejected. So that is the point that I would like to highlight here. Now, okay, you can see there. Now, what do we know from history? Now, I would say that as a student of history, I was exposed to all disciplines. I was not confined to any specific methodology. And therefore, I would say that I have more access to the development of knowledge than those who come from discipline background like psychology or sociology or anthropology. And in these sources, you will find quite common this idea that, I'm quoting a teacher who says that a supreme being appears in almost every myth. So what is myth? Myth became a source of information. Now, when you talk about myth, look at the dictionary, you will see that myth, when you want to understand Tawheed, Tawheed itself declares La ilaha illallah. La ilaha comes first. In other words, you see the negative first to see the positive. Now, if you want to understand myth, and myth will say that it is opposite to reality. And therefore, you lose the ground from the very term myth. But as a student of history, I would like to suggest that we must not reject myth. And very good evidence for that is in the 1830s, a German businessman was thrilled with Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. He was particularly interested in the city of Troy. And he thought that the description that you find in Homer's work of the city of Troy, he would go and dig out the area. And amazingly, they found the ruin of the city of Troy. Here again, problem with the source is that Homer was living in 8th century BC. And he was talking about the destruction of the city of Troy, which happened 1100 BC. 300 years before his time. Now, how much of the information that Homer had to write on the city of Troy is a question. Also, Homer's original work does not exist anymore. It has been copied and copied and copied and translated into other languages and inherited by other people, and it has come to us. In other words, this information cannot be reliable. But at the same time, we cannot reject the idea that Homer existed and the city of Troy also was destroyed because of a civil war. Now, when we study Greek civilization, usually we make a reference to the 5th, 4th, and 3rd centuries of the period of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. We don't make any reference to Mycenaean civilization, or a couple of civilizations existed before. And some of those civilizations collapsed in the 11th century BC. So in other words, it is not easy to extract information from the sources that we have today. And that is one of the fundamental challenges as a student of history. Now, as a student of history, I'm not referring to only those who are specializing in studying history. I'm including all social science and also natural science disciplines, because no natural science, mathematics, you cannot study without knowing history of mathematics. And therefore, all this information came to us through this kind of sources, which we claim that we study scientifically, but I'll just come to this point that I strongly doubt with how much really science we have applied in studying the civilization. So these questions naturally appear, like what is myth, and what is religion also, because most of the religion, I'll point out some of these here, and question of pseudo-religiosity. In fact, I came to know Dr. Imtiyaz through my father-in-law. And my father-in-law used to use this term pseudo-religiosity very frequently. I think you will agree with me. Yeah. Pseudo-religiosity and religiosity. What has come to us as religion is extremely problematic. And that is what he used to call pseudo-religiosity. And this is necessary for us to study. Now, I'm quoting Newton here, and I'm quoting this sentence from a history book, that Newton believed that God not only set the universe in motion, but still intervened in its operations. thus leaving room for miracles. So the point here that we need to highlight is Darwin. Darwin absolutely deviated from this Newtonian view. And in fact, many of the Enlightenment philosophers also deviated, but we'll come to it later. But this is very important for us to know. Now, I'm bringing Huntington here because, as I said earlier, that the term civilization has been introduced in recent history by Huntington. And since his publication, textbooks have taken, you see, the idea of nation state, superiority of the nation state idea, I mean, diluted to a great extent because of civilization. See, I mean, European civilization is one civilization, Islamic civilization as one civilization. This kind of studies diluted the nationalist tendencies to a great extent. But yet, of course, we'll suggest that nationalism has not died down. It is extremely strong force even now. But I'm quoting to describe civilization from Huntington, suggesting that this is a sentence that I have taken from his book, that civilizations have no clear-cut boundaries and no precise beginnings and endings. Many people will say that this is true. Is it? If I ask you, would you agree? Civilizations do not have boundaries and no beginnings and endings. Well, the idea of boundaries, maybe you can say to an extent that it does not have a boundary. But beginnings and endings, of course, we don't know the ending of Islamic civilization, but do we know the beginning of Islamic civilization? So that is the point that we should keep in mind when we are studying these scholars. There is no culture recorded in human history which has not practiced some form of religion. The observations raise questions about sources of knowledge and how to evaluate sources. And that is the point that I was trying to highlight. Now, I have taken a direct quotation from a textbook which we were following at Istanbul Shahir University. I was introduced to this textbook by another very prominent Turkish historian who introduced the book in the general studies curriculum of Istanbul Shahir University. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Istanbul Shahir University. Istanbul Shahir University was established in 2008 with the initiative of Brother Ahmed Davutoglu, who was our colleague here in this university, then became the Prime Minister of Turkey. Ahmed Davutoglu, as a graduate student, started a foundation called Foundation for Arts and Science. And what he did was that he studied all the universities' curriculum for in Istanbul, of social science curriculum in graduate level, saw the lacking from the Islamic perspective, those aspects which were lacking. He established a foundation, courses, developed new courses. The courses would be offered free to students, and the lecturers who taught also taught free. I mean, Professor Alfred Salam has taught in that program, many others. That was 1980s. 1990s, the foundation developed. 2008, that foundation established Istanbul Shahir University. And I joined the university in 2018, but by then they had got very prominent scholars from different parts of the world, particularly Turkish scholars, those who were prominent in their fields. I think there were only 2 Nobel laureates in Turkey at the time, and both of them were in the governing body of that university. But unfortunately, our Islam-loving President Erdogan has shut down the university because of disagreement between him and Ahmad Dawood. It was through a presidential decree. He shut down the university in a way that it will never be able to come back. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that university had established a very good faculty and a curriculum, but unfortunately, these are some of the realities of our Muslim world. So in this book, sorry, I'm just deviating a little bit too much from what I'm discussing. This book quotes from Hinduism that, Hinduism comes later, but this observation that only 350 years ago, English clerics claimed on the basis of biblical calculations and Christian tradition that the first day of creation was Sunday, October 23, 4004 BCE. One scholar even specified that creation happened at 9 a.m. on the morning of that day. Now we see things differently. The origin of the universe dates back some 15 billion years. Now, you are giving this information to the late teenagers, 17, 18, 19-year-old. And you are creating this tension between science and religion. Because science is saying that the world is 15 billion years old, and religion is saying that this was created 6 days, and all these stories. And therefore, first conflict between, the impact of Darwinian theory into the curriculum I'm pointing out to you. Now, the author, the same book, next page discusses this. It gives the religious view, that Hindu view of creation. Why Hinduism? Because most scholars feel that Hinduism is the oldest religion, and therefore, in order to understand religion, you have to go to the oldest text. And all these information that how the first man or first God, whatever you call him, came into existence and what he was. Now, if you look at this and study it deeply, you will see that the author perhaps is looking at the idea of omnipresent, omnipotent, these qualities of unseen God that has been described. Perhaps the author is trying to, give it a physical shape, something like that. I'm not going to reject it totally because it gives some information, yet it is not reliable information. And that is where science comes. Science should be applied to examine sources, not rejecting sources. Okay, so these are some of the descriptions, but it also mentions about immortal heaven. Now, I'm quoting Rousseau here. You know, Rousseau, a remarkable man, 1762, he came up with 3 books. One is The Social Contract, very much used in political science and economics and all those subjects. And this is his second book on education. Because he rejected the original sin, he did not believe that human being was born with some idea, innate idea. He thought man was born, Lockean idea, all these ideas. He thought that man was born with what do you call it, clean slate. It was not, they believed in clean slate, and therefore he gave his theory of education. And in his theory of education, he says, this is, you open the book, first page, this quotation comes. Everything is good as it leaves the hands of the author of things. Everything degenerates in the hands of man. You see, if you compare this statement with the Quranic statement that refers to the religious teachers who sold the divine message at a very cheap price. Surah Tawbah, Surah 9, verse 9 talks about it, and many other verses about this, that the original teachings of religion was always changed by the scholars of religion itself. And how it happened, some of it I will discuss in our lecture. So I got an article and in the Conversation. I don't know whether you are familiar with Conversation. Conversation is one of the leading, you can say, a mixture of magazine and critical journal paper. It is always, they are very strict about publication. They look at the background of the author, and it has to be an academic to publish in Conversation. So one observation that I have taken from Conversation is that students seem to perceive evolutionary biology as a threat to their religious beliefs. As a consequence, they do not fully engage with science. So you see, this idea of science, how it has caused disservice to academia, that this idea of evolutionary biology, I don't know whether you're familiar with Steven Pinker, a very famous Harvard scholar, has come out with very good ideas. In fact, we have used his work in our work, Quranic Guidance for Good Governance, because many ideas that he suggests, which he says that are hardwired in the brain, Quran says that, but unfortunately these people do not study the Quran, and therefore they do not have the exposure to that. And some of it I'll point out in a while. So this is how the confusion between science and religion started to occur. And here I'm quoting, I'm repeating what I said in the beginning, that what Darwin says, and how religion was rejected. Theology was rejected from science. So here, those who are familiar with the development of history as a discipline, E.H. Carr is a very famous historian. He also approves evolution as science, and he thinks that progress in history was confirmed by Darwinian theory. But the problem here is that Darwin, again, is faulty, but not in finding many of the developments in history. many ideas. I mean, evolution, of course, you cannot reject. But in the process of evolution, if you reject the idea of God's intervention in history, it becomes problematic. Because human responsibility comes through this idea of creation by one God. And here, in the latest work by Fukuyama, I think 2011 publication, he discusses, the title of the book is No, 2011 is about the history. I mean, no, after that. Anyway, you Google Fukuyama, you will find easily. I mean, it's a history of, I think, beginning.
It's a history of political regimes.
No, yeah, I mean, the term political is there, but not regime. Yeah.
This is one of the earliest.
No, Fukuyama's, this is 2011 publication.
Get it.
2011 publication, huh?
I'll get it.
Yeah. So he says that these new findings in evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology, some of these findings are extremely important. You cannot reject them, they are real science. Yet, the way it has been interpreted, my disagreement is on the interpretation, not in the finding.
It is the origins of political order.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
the origin of political order, 2011 publication. Yeah. So he says that in the Western philosophical tradition, discussions of the state of nature have been central to the understanding of justice and political order that underlines modern liberal democracy. And of course, I don't have to explain to you that he says that Western philosophical tradition, Muslims are not away from it. Muslims also have adopted the same. And everything that modern biology and anthropology tell us about the state of nature suggests the opposite. I mean, what is the state of nature? Look at Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes. The nature, the state of nature. In the state of nature, Hobbes says that every man is against every man. This chaos, conflict, it is through this. Now, if you look at the racial theories that dominate us today, Hindutva or Zionism or white supremacy, they take their cue from that idea. That human being started from that Hobbesian theory. Human brain is hardwired with the faculties that facilitate many forms of social cooperation. This cooperation is very important. When you study civilization, and here I very much appreciate the contribution that Ibn Khaldun made 600 years ago, that he says that civilization is the product of human cooperation. It is not result of conflict. It is not that the pharaohs were able to enslave millions of people and employed them to construct the pyramid. When you study Egyptian civilization or Mesopotamian civilization, we only look at the building, pyramid or ziggurat. But ziggurat was not established the first day. Ziggurat needed hundreds and thousands of people to cooperate. How this cooperation was achieved? And there is no explanation of this cooperation in the civilization theories that developed in Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. Ibn Khaldun makes this. I will come to Freud. Freud recognizes it but does not explain. So Darwin says that there is no evidence that man was aboriginally endowed with the ennobling belief in the existence of omnipotent God. he definitely has those scenarios that man originated in the jungle. And if you identify the origin of man in the jungle, of course, you will fall into that trap, man in nature theory of Hobbes. And he says that there is ample evidence derived not from hasty travelers, but from men who have long resided with savages. So these are not civilized. Civilization came from the savages. That numerous races have existed and still exist who have no idea of one or more gods. So he's saying that this idea of man in nature was the real beginning of human history. And here I'm pointing out to Macaulay. I don't know whether you're familiar with Macaulay.
Originally.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because I think, yeah, it is possible. I'll check and I'll correct it, inshallah. Thank you for, yes, you are right. Yeah. So the point that I'd like to highlight is that how you study sources. And for him, the sources is the travelers, not history traveler, but those who have lived with them. And from there, he is trying to understand the beginning of human history. And that is what I'm challenging from the very beginning, that this view of beginning of human history is faulty. As opposed to this, and here I bring Immanuel Kant, and I have tremendous amount of respect for him because he was a serious scholar, not scholar like Darwin or Macaulay, but he was able to give very good understanding based on reason. And Kant says the beginning of human history, and he says that he's taking it from a sacred document. He is not hiding the fact that he has learned this from the Old Testament, from the Genesis. And he is saying that this is a conjectural venture. You know, in scholarship, when you want to demolish someone's work, you say that this is conjecture. This is not thesis. This is not science. This is conjecture. But conjecture also is important when you develop your original thinking. And he says that I am taking advantage of that conjecture. And he says that imagination. But imagination is based on experience and reason. And this is very important. And see how he explains, and as opposed to that, how Freud does. Because I'm bringing Freud here mainly because Freud also wrote on civilization. His book, Civilization and its Discontents, he addresses this question. Now Kant says, now some of these four ideas are very significant. That first, man must have been fully developed and could stand, walk, and speak with the help of coherent concept and consequently think. Now, this means you have to keep in mind that Kant, of course, came 100 years before Darwin. And he is talking about evolution. In other words, this idea of evolution did not originate with Darwin. It was there. I think Ibn Maskawiyya has worked on it. He has pointed out some of the evolutionary ideas. And many people used to think that this slow growth of human being might have occurred. And Darwin's theory, of course, made it very scientific and acceptable to the whole community, whole academic institutions. So he says that the first man had to be fully developed, could stand, walk. That means the earlier ideas were perhaps this could not walk, or maybe 4-footed to 2-footed. In fact, if you look at the history books, you will find some of the computer generated figures, how man from crawling with 4 legs become slowly 2-legged. This kind of descriptions you will find in the textbooks. Then he says that initially they have been guided solely by instinct, that voice of God which all animals obey. In other words, it seems that he is suggesting that in the beginning, man followed a natural process, and the natural process was similar to animals. And then he says that there must have been one couple in order that they may reproduce their kind. And he's also saying that this idea that different races originated in different parts of the world also is faulty. He says that it has to be one couple. And in fact, some new researchers are suggesting this, although in the process, they say so many things are sometimes do not make sense or confusing. But the point is that this one couple idea also is getting some kind of recognition from the scientific community. And then he says that this common descent of all human beings from a single family was necessary to promote sociability and principal end of human destiny. So this is again based on experience and imagination, Kant is suggesting. Then he says that how human beings became, they excelled over other species. This is how he says that develop the ability to identify suitable food. And he says that in his description that it is possible that human being could distinguish between different fruits, edible fruits or non-edible fruits, by smell or some kind of idea which perhaps is lost with the development of, it's again an evolutionary process. Discovered sexual stimulus that is not transient and based on periodic urge like animals, but prolonged and increased by means of imagination and a taste of beauty. This is very important. I have sometimes wondered why Quran spends so much time in describing the sexual behavior. Because this is one of the fundamental aspects that human beings deviate from the guidance. And Quran spends a lot of space for this guidance. And Kant says that, which is, in animal world, you will see that mothers, sons, father, daughter having sex. Look at the cat family or dog family or whatever you have that kind. Human being is the only species which is not victim of this kind of. And it is important mainly because, again, we have said that because we are interested in finding out the guidance for life. If you want to have peaceful guidance, you have to have some kind of discipline. And this is one of the fundamental discipline that Kant says that originated from the very beginning of human journey in this world. Developed a sense of anticipation of the future. Again, this does not exist. Maybe some kind of, some sense of future is there in some animals, but not like human being for a prolonged time. And also human being, even though is not stronger than a tiger or an elephant, yet has been able to confine those animals in the zoo. So he says that this development led human beings to freedom. When you are at the state of nature, you don't have the freedom like animals. Animals do what is natural for them. But human being is the only species which has the ability to think. And he says that emergence from the paradise, from that paradise, which reason represents to him as the first abode of his species, was nothing other than his transition from a rude, purely animal existence to a state of humanity. So if you call humanity, it starts from there, after you have crossed that barrier of nature. And he says that from leading strings of instinct to the guidance of reason. So human beings are capable of follow guidance with reason, Kant says. And the state of freedom, the individual has cause to blame himself for all the ills which he endures, for all the evil which he perpetrates. Here again, Kant answers to many questions that philosophers have raised, particularly our Mu'tazili tradition. You will see that this kind of questions: why God is so unjust? Why should he? These babies in Syria will die like this, or suffering in the earthquake in the region where was already devastated by these questions, of course, natural questions. But these questions, Kant says that it is human earnings. Here I'll give you an example. Today, you will find many people are talking about climatic devastation that we are about to face in a decade or maybe few decades or whatever. And they're saying that we can prevent it. But look at since when we have started talking about climatic changes, since the 1980s to about 40, 50 years now. Have we changed our behavior? And compare that, what Quran is saying, that this azab, you brought it to yourself. I cannot explain every azab, like earthquakes, but I think we can explain floods or cyclones or some climatic changes, right? Drought. These are all human achievements. I should not say achievement, human actions. And yet, we will not accept what the religious texts are telling us as source of guidance. So he says that a human being they should be proud as well, because they admire and praise wisdom, purposiveness, and overall arrangement. I mean, human being has this ability. Now, as opposed to that, Sorry, I'm taking a little bit too longer, but I want to finish what I want to say. Yeah. Now, as I said, Freud was again 100 years, more than 100 years later, then about 100 years later than Immanuel Kant. He wrote on civilization, and I chose him because he also laid down the foundation of a very significant methodology. The methodology is psychoanalysis. And I would like to highlight here the faulty foundation that he has. And he says that first acts of civilization were use of tools. Then he says the gaining of control over fire and construction of dwellings. Now, the control on fire. Of course, it was a very significant development. I don't think that the way it is explained that some people saw spark, the cloud clashing with each other and then creating the thunder, and from thunder the forest got fire, and from there they got the fire. Very difficult to accept. We don't have any explanation for this, and that is why I would say that what Newton was saying, that we cannot really reject miracles. Miracles did happen in many occasions. And control over fire stands out as quite extraordinary and exemplary achievement, but he does not address the question of the development of speech, human speech. This is another issue that Immanuel Kant from the very beginning said that the first human being could speak. Not only speak, first human being also could think. And this is a challenging idea because we don't have evidence for that. Now, if you Google, and I heard from our colleagues in communication department, they have books on the subject, how human speech developed from sign language, to me, all these are foolish kind of science. It does not make sense to me. Human being from the very beginning, to my understanding, as the Quran says. Of course, Quran says many things. Some of them might be evolutionary, but Allamahul Bayan statement seems to be instant, not evolution. But again, I'm not an expert on the subject. I cannot, but this is what I believe. Civilization depends on, this is the point that I was trying to suggest earlier, that Ibn Khaldun says this point, that it is a result of human cooperation. And of course, Ibn Khaldun explains that through divine guidance. But since he does not, Freud does not believe in divine guidance, he says that it happened, but he does not know how it happened, how cooperation happened. But he recognizes the fact that without cooperation, civilization could not have been established. And this is a dilemma for Freud, because he wants to give full freedom to human beings. But if you give full freedom, what happens is that this unrestrained sexuality drains off psychic energy. And psychic energy, he thinks, that is essential for creative thinking. And therefore, the point that I would like to highlight is that he also admits that there has to be some limitation of the human being, and that limitation, human being has to decide for himself or herself. And these are part of divine teaching that I'd like to highlight here. And okay, yeah, this is his, yeah. And in fact, he wrote a book on religion, Origin of Religion, and the title of his book is The History of Illusion. You know who coined the term illusion for religion? Karl Marx. Karl Marx used it before him, but he did not ridicule religion the way Freud did. And he says that I have tried to show that religious ideas have arisen from the same need as have all the other achievements of civilization, from the necessity of defending oneself against the crushing superior force of nature. This is how he explains the origin of religion, because he would not like to believe in any divine intervention or divine entity guiding mankind. Now he says also, body of religious ideas as usually put forward as a divine revelation, but this presentation of it is itself a part of the religious system, and it entirely ignores the known historical development of those ideas and their differences in different epochs of civilizations. So in other words, this materialism that he subscribed to is so confusing, and these are not rational to my understanding. And he was Jewish, but he was surrounded by the Catholics, and therefore the role of the father was very prominent in his thought. And he thought that father was so cruel a figure that children were so much afraid of the father, and therefore everything comes because of fear. And this is how religion was interpreted in both, particularly sociology and psychology disciplines. Out of fear. Religion came out of fear. Well, of course, religion talks about fear, but whether it came from that fear human being developed it or not, I will touch this subject in a greater extent in the next lecture, inshallah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. And he says that religion derived from human wishes and a kind of psychiatric delusion. Religion was psychiatric delusion. Psychiatry as a discipline, of course, originated with Freud and deist philosophers of the 18th century. See, this is how the deists believed. Deists did not reject the existence of God, but they rejected those which did not make sense to them naturally. And it is because of that he is telling, these philosophers like Rousseau, Voltaire, Montesquieu, or Hume, or all these philosophers, they all rejected this. Hume, of course, was much more deep into attacking religion, but the others were followers of religion, but they accepted it. But then the point I'm highlighting here is that they deviated from the Newtonian view. And I'm saying that whether some of the explanations has to be evolutionary or revolutionary. And I take these two terms as opposite to each other, meaning instant and slow growth. And what I'm suggesting here is that I'm not challenging some of these theories of Darwin. It is possible that human-like species existed in history, and the fossil evidences that we have of the human-like bodies, it is possible that they existed. They might be million-year old. I don't know when the first couple existed in history, but I would like to suggest that human species started with one couple. That is my main focus of today's talk. And therefore, I subscribe to Kantian view. And to me, the best integration of science and religion you will find in the Quran, and we can talk about it later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Abdullah. We have raised many questions and very rich, lots of points to go over. And your main point is, which is basically in agreement with the study of religion, all religion. We talk about creation or origination of human being as a couple. And it is repeated, as you said, in reference to the myths. And myths are very important. Myths as creation stories. Just to highlight some few points, which are main important points, is that human creation and human cooperation is important. Religion and science have to work in tandem. And what you reminded me is that when the whole social sciences, which has emerged, and when you go to the West, and also when I went to America, also these museums of natural history, and they are the museums of distortion of interpretation of human origin. So studying human religion through practices is not enough. We have to go to the original sources. And as historians, and even as history of religions, we are here in ISTAC, where we study Islamic thought and civilization. We have to look at the history of religions and look at how religions talk about the origin of human being. And you also rightly said that anthropology talks about man. And I also, there was a journal called Man, in which females are not included. It is the origin of man is more important. While this is totally wrong from the Quranic point of view.
The title of Darwin's work is Origin of Man.
Yeah.
But of course, one should be very clear about it that when they talk about man, they mean human being. So I'm not undermining Darwin here.
Yeah.
But now we have become very sensitive because of feminism.
Yeah.
And
other issue.
After a while, we finish with that. There is nothing.
Yeah.
Not
No.
unknown.
Well, you see, problem is that many universities have started gender studies, and it has become a, sorry, I'm coming back to you. It has become a huge problem in the school curriculum in America now. How you teach gender in school curriculum. It's very, very challenging.
School, besides those issues, several others, we are not going to touch on that now. And he also talked about pseudo-religiosity. And this is very important. We are all pseudo-religious in a way. Is religion the essence of our experience? And then we talk about the Quran verse 9:9 as the original teaching. But important point which I liked is that Western scholars talk about miracles, but miracles because Jesus has to be referred to. But in Islam, with the coming of the Quran, the age of miracles is over. The age of reason begins. And I want to stop here, reason and revelation and history. So let's talk on these three topics in relation to what Professor Abdullah Ahsan has said. So I open it to the floor. Anyone has a question or comment to make, please go ahead. Please raise your hand. And
just keep in mind that my focus has been the curriculum for late teenagers, freshmen, undergrad students, and give them a worldview which is scientific, reasonable, and workable. That is my focus. And in this, we want to study the sources, how to evaluate sources to get this kind of, to get guidance from. We'll talk more about it. Just keep in mind that we are going to talk, we have 2 more talks. The next talk will devote on divine guidance in history.
any questions from the floor here? Yes, please. Please state your name and who you are and what is, yeah, and we have one speaker on it.
So my question is that today we live in a globalized world. So most of the problems that we are facing are global problems. So there is a notion of global civilization, and we all have to come up with solutions to solve the problem. There are no more local problems because of even if it is an economic problem, we say that if the U.S. economy gets a goal, the whole world sneezes. So and we also know that now we are no more living in a closed system. These systems are open systems that need to be studied in relation to each other. For example, economy cannot be studied in isolation. We need to incorporate politics, sociology, and all these things. So my question is related to how to integrate different worldviews, the Western worldview and different Muslim worldview, secular worldview. So how to integrate these worldviews so that we can come up with the problems that the global civilization is facing?
Actually, that is the question that I'm trying to address, that, and I call it worldview, a universal worldview we are trying to establish. And I think education is the only way. And that is why I'm suggesting that we should introduce courses with good understanding of civilizations in history and see how divine guidance has helped us in organizing, governing this society. And you will come up with, I mean, division, you can clearly see, has been created by human beings. And if you want to integrate, you have to integrate by the, I mean, human beings have to integrate themselves. So this compartmentalization of knowledge, which has happened in the 19th century, is a disservice to knowledge. You look at Al-Ghazali, was he a philosopher? Was he a faqih? Was he a medical doctor? I mean, Ibn Sina was both famous medical doctor, but most of them had knowledge which was comprehensive. This division occurred only in the 19th century, even in the Western tradition. I mean, look at Thomas Aquinas. They incorporated all, not only religion, they talked about the whole system. And now, in many universities in the United States, have developed this kind so-called interdisciplinary approach. But this interdisciplinary approach has become only slogan type of stuff, because you have to correct your worldview. Once you look at the human being as one who can think in different directions, only then you can address the problem. That is why I'm trying to suggest that. I mean, hopefully someday I'll come up with a textbook. I mean, I have worked here almost 30 years and we have not been able to produce this kind of textbooks, which was necessary. But this is, I must admit that we have not been able to do it. We have used different terms. Professor Arshad Islam is here. I mean, we have used different kinds of, I mean, PowerPoints to describe our, yeah, but this is something that we need to do. Thank you.
Yes, Gary.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gary Dargan. I'm a former PhD student from ISTAC. Just some comments. I really appreciate the fact that you have not sort of lumped Darwin in with the atheists, because he really wasn't. He had some serious problems about the religion that surrounded him, because he came from a Unitarian family rather than a Trinitarian Christian family. But he still had those beliefs. He discussed them deeply with his deeply Christian wife. He had serious problems with the whole nature of evil. particularly with the death of his much loved daughter Annie, and he expressed those problems in his Origin of Species. He didn't have the answer. He should have read Al-Ghazali, because Al-Ghazali had the answer. One of the things that you have to realise is that science has, and the worldview, if you like, of science, and the methodology of science has come to dominate the way we think. And unfortunately, most of us accept it without questioning. But it raises important questions for us. It can tell us, for instance, that man is not exempt from nature. We may be able to wall it off to some extent and create a little environment and an ecology around us, but that has effects elsewhere throughout the environment, and eventually nature will come back to bite us, and we've seen that in emerging diseases. We've seen that in coronavirus, and we've seen it in the climatic problems in terms of increased severe weather events like floods and bushfires and so on. So we have to be aware of the implications of science and how to deal with those implications. And that's something where revelation and our religious belief and our social systems and culture have to be looked at to deal with those. And you cannot, for instance, use science as a means of rejecting religion. The atheists who hijack science for that purpose are doing religion a disservice, and they're doing science a disservice. And that's, I think, an important message that people have to get.
Yeah. So you don't have a question, though?
No,
it's
just, I appreciate that last to hear someone who said that Darwin was not an atheist, or was not the enemy of religion, because he isn't.
Okay, that helps your position, as we understand always. There are some questions on from Zoom. I'm going to present them to you. There's a person called Khalid Ahmed Muhammad Israel. Yeah, so there are many Khalids in the world. No, this is Khalid Ahmed Muhammad.
Okay, go ahead. Put the question.
Is it this?
Both of them are in the Zoom.
Both of them.
Khalid and brother.
All right. Anyway, so let me go to the question by Khalid Ahmed Muhammad Israel. How long is the tension between revelation and reason going to exist?
Well, I don't know the future, sorry.
He's a historian.
I want to understand what is going to happen in the future, but I don't have the timetable. Sorry.
Okay. The other question is by Muhammad Asri Sabri. Is a student. In some opinion, the origin of human beings is a kind of al-ghaib that should rely on revelation, Quran and Hadith. Science cannot be by its nature confirm or deny the revelation relating to this matter. So what is the best method to accept that revelation has informed us regarding this? The question is 3 or 4.
I know. I think Kant does a good job. So that is what I thought that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm presenting it not as a Muslim who want to propagate Islam, but I'm presenting it as student of history who wants to critically evaluate the past and go for the future. So when you critically evaluate it and try to understand things rationally, I think naturally you will accept what the Quran is telling you. And the next 2 lectures also will involve what I'm suggesting.
When you refer to Kant, Kant talks about religion within the limits of reason. That is very important. And also Kant talks about perpetual peace instead of confrontation, which is important. And what you mentioned is from his essays on perpetual peace. The third question here is from Wong Hee Lam. The complexity of cellular function and physiologies in different species is beyond Darwinian hypothesis. There must be a creator of all species. So Darwin's evolution can only explain what may happen after creation. What is your opinion on the later, that is of the present understanding of cellular function and physiologies of different species?
I'm sorry, I have not studied these subjects, scientific subjects, but my general understanding is that, I mean, many aspects that evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology that they're identifying now, if you study some of these Quranic views, they will be supportive to those views. So I don't think that I can prove it in
I think he also agrees with you that there must be a creator of all the species.
Right, definitely. Of course. I mean, that is my fundamental point, that particularly as far as human beings are concerned, the sense of responsibility and accountability is essential for governing the life. And if you want to understand history, you have to understand how religion has governed, has guided mankind in the past.
Yeah. Also from the perspective of history of religion, Max Muller says the distinction between human and the other is language. And language is the source of all revelations in all traditions and all religions around the world. So all myths are rooted in language, and that is the distinction. That's why human beings have religion, while the animals don't have religion. So
animals don't have guidance.
Don't have guidance, yes. Yeah, but they function. Yeah, they function.
Instinct, yes. And Kant says that.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to have
I'd actually like to comment on that question. What that person has been reading, obviously, as the theory of intelligent design. Now, there's a term called an oxymoron, which is two words joined together, which means something that's completely ridiculous. An intelligent design is an oxymoron. Intelligent design implies that things are so complex, you have to have had a designer. But it's dishonest in that it was developed in America, where you cannot teach religion in public schools. And the idea behind intelligent design is the designer was God, but they never say it. The issue of the complexity of a cell, evolution has an explanation for it. What you're doing is you're going further and further back. Once evolution has an explanation for the cell, how does it explain the organelles within the cells? How does it explain the biochemistry? And so on. You're pushing the question further and further back. You can even go right back to the origin of life and non-life. And science has explanations for that. Then you go even further back. How do you explain chemistry? How do you explain the laws of physics? How do you explain the universe? So you're getting further and further back into issues which have a crossover somewhere between God created the universe and everything flowed from there. Are you a deist? Are you a theist? It's a complex problem, and that's where we have to have that dialogue.
Yeah, there's
You have Brother Khalid.
yeah, Brother Khalid wants to ask a question by my microphone. Brother Muzammil, can you open it? Hi. Yes, Brother Khalid, can you go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
Assalamualaikum. It appears that
Could I see you also?
my mic is.
Okay, go ahead and present.
You want to see me? Sir, I am not properly clothed. Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You can see me, but my question about some items that were discussed today to answer what was presented by Darwin and the others who tried to disprove God or to disprove the creator, is there is this very cogent Kalam cosmological argument that believes that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. This whole argument about contingent beings and the necessary being. Even if evolution is true, it still is subject to what is called the Kalam cosmological argument, which says that, okay, so this is a contingent, whatever is created is a contingent being, and that contingent being is contingent on a creator, who is the uncreated necessary being. Can these arguments be put forth to circumvent or to answer those who believe that there was no creator?
I'm not sure whether.
So
I
what is the question?
The question is, in all these discussions that we've heard this far, we did not hear about the Kalam cosmological argument to confront those who present only evolution as a proposition to prove that there was no God or there is no God.
Okay, we got the question, yes.
Is the question clear?
Yeah, it's clear now.
I'm not sure.
No, he's saying that we have presented all these theories, but we have not talked about the Kalam explanation. Actually, that is your next topic.
The Kalam cosmological.
I'm going to talk about, I am saying time and again that next week I'll be talking more about religion.
Yeah, next, the professor's, Abdullah's next lecture is going to be on divine rise and the rise of civilization. Today, he's presenting the theories of creation, which are present in the textbooks and curriculums around the world when they talk about human creation or evolution.
Okay, it's understood. I did have another question, which you told me you will ask him directly, but if it is fair, then I would ask him. But I will leave that decision to you, Professor Imtiyaz.
No, go ahead and ask your next question.
Yeah, my observation during the talk was two things. One is, if I have understood him correctly, Professor Abdullah Ahsan says that the religion that was handed over to him, if I heard him correctly, was a pseudo-religion. And pseudo-religion is what was handed over to most of us. So what exactly was that pseudo-religion, and how did he discover the real religion? Is my question clear?
I think I will address most of it next week. And in short, what I'm suggesting is that religion can be understood. It is again a human phenomenon. One may disagree with each other. Similar situation exists with pseudo-religiosity, but to identify it, it will vary from person to person. So, I mean, let us leave it for next week. Thank you.
Okay, then one final question, which maybe you could leave it for next week, is also this extrapolation of the verse in Surah Tawbah 9:9, in which God Almighty speaks about the scholars of the Jewish faith having sold the revelation of God.
Your interpretation. Quran doesn't say that.
No. The Quran, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. The Quran says that the religious scholars sold God's revelation for a paltry price. Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
But it doesn't say Jewish though. You said Jewish. So.
But how has it been understood all through the centuries by the Mufassirun?
Well, that is the problem of Mufassirun, not mine.
So that means your understanding is not the problem, but the problem of the Mufassirun is the problem.
Clear in our understanding. It is not only, I mean, I see a lot of problem in Hinduism, which is not very different from Judaism, I mean, the Jewish scholars. And I just read this morning, the Egyptian president is visiting India, and the Mufti has given a big fatwa that India is a very harmonious country. So this is the ulama. I mean, I'm not going to blame the Jewish ulama for that. Yeah, I mean, this is ridiculous.
No, it's okay. I mean, I just
don't bring Jewish everywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which we a lot of the scholars will sell their religion for a very cheap price.
Yeah, and we have to understand the context in which the revelation comes. It is the Arabian society and the kuffar and the mushriks in Arabia. We cannot ignore Yes, yes, yes. Yes, brother, Professor Tahir.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Prof. Absolutely for a very thought-provoking and profound submission. Just have two or three aspects to talk back in some comment and actually suggestion also. You have spoke quite extensively the 19th century, and of course you highlighted Darwin's impact on the issue of relationship between religion and science, and of course also on shaping contemporary or modern worldview. I would like to suggest here that to extend the scope of your investigation in the 19th century to include a trio, starting of course with Darwin himself, but also at the same time and same period, you will find someone who has also contributed and in a very profound manner to shaping sociology and sociological thought and even scientific thought. I mean, Auguste Comte, the French, because he also approached history, social history, from a positivistic as well as evolutionary point of view. And here comes his interpretation of religion, actually is explaining away religion as being part of the early primitive stage of a human development. So this actually gives another dimension to the theory of evolution at the historical point of view and in civilizations, because as you can know, he came up with the conclusion in his 5-volume book, Positivism, that the modern and the new religion of humanity is science, and the priests are the scientists in the laboratories. So this has very important impact on how to look at religion and Islamic relationship with science. Then Marx completed the triangle with focusing on economics and also in evolutionary manner to say how the class conflict will make humanity involved to a certain ultimate stage of economic development. Of course, Fukuyama took it as to be the capitalistic system and embodied in America. Others would say, and Marx, of course, will say that it is the communist
socialist
system. Then when we come to Freud, he is actually was extending the same basic ideas, fundamental ideas, to the internal psychological and spiritual aspect of humanity. And of course, he had his, just like them, this kind of reductionist vision, which reduces the whole energies of mankind and to the sexual aspect or to the libido. But I think that this form will give us a kind of to understand how the dominant worldview came to be shaped. It's not just science in biology and natural sciences, but also we have to take care of what others have. And of course, these together have shaped the future development, the later development of the most of the disciplines, especially in the social sciences, whether anthropology, political science, etc. So I think it would be good if you could give attention and perhaps more research and incorporate these things to really give us because you want to make people understand how this prevalent worldview has been working and how it has gone. And then here we have to be very much aware of the crucial relationship between power and knowledge.
Okay. Good.
This is
Okay.
very important. Power, because this word of you could not be made universal and dominant without power.
Got it.
Well, my main interest has been the textbooks that we follow in our classrooms. So that is why I have just pointed out by quoting those statements in the book. But you are right. I mean, in order to extend the argument, to make it more acceptable, it would be good to take the overall shape. I'll think about it. Thank you for your.
Anybody else? Yes.
The new question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, the Darwinian understanding of evolution of human has an impact on other subjects, like, for example, in economics, we think that development is linear, and we have maybe Western civilization as a role model, and all the developing countries have to progress towards that idea. Similarly, humans are not cooperative human beings, but like those who fight with each other give rise to the utilitarian self-interested theory in economics. So the present, if you want to reform these ideas, we want to talk about interdisciplinary approaches, but all these different disciplines have a very history that is already not reconciling each other. Do we need to, like in our educational reforms, need to teach our students to reconcile these historical phenomena, or we need to inculcate creative and critical thinking so that they find their own solutions and reconcile them for themselves, like give them a broader worldview? But
Yeah, I agree. I agree that more freedom is necessary. The disciplines have confined our thought to a specific direction. And as the Quran says, it is not easy to give up your forefathers' ideas. So this is forefather, meaning that the subject itself has developed over the last couple of centuries. It's not easy. Only free thinking. I'm extremely in favor of independent thinking, critical thinking. Unfortunately, I mean, this is something that people don't want to hear, but thing is that we have subjects like critical thinking. In the Cambridge system, you have exams, you take exams of critical thinking. To me, critical thinking is a methodology, is not a subject of study. You apply critical thinking in every subject that you study. The more that you will apply critical thinking in any subject, you will free yourself. And this is what the Quran is saying time and again. I think, I mean, you have rightly suggested that we should encourage more critical thinking.
Yeah, as Professor Ahsan is saying, they always go to the old tales, Asatir al-Awwaleen, and they are repeating again and again. And even Hobbes' theory of social contract is an imaginary theory. It did not happen. It is an imaginary theory. Yes, Lucy, please.
My question is, can Darwinism explain civilization when even human nature cannot? Since civilization, as Voltaire said, is greater than mere natural disposition of humans.
Sorry, again.
Repeat again.
Can Darwinism explain civilization when even human nature cannot? Since civilization, as Voltaire said, is greater than their natural disposition of humans.
Actually, Darwin is not talking about civilization. It is Freud that is bringing civilization based on Darwinian theory. Darwin is giving the perception of the development of the human being. And within the human society, you will find evolutionary growth. For example, if you look at history of revelations, say closer to the Quran is the Old Testament. But Old Testament is a development of almost 1,000 years. And you find still more ideas which you can say perhaps coming from the original source of the Old Testament. But if you go to earlier periods like see Indian civilization, Upanishad, before Upanishad, Veda, totally lost because so many intervention and human. That is why it is very difficult to understand civilization's rise from those evidences. You see, when I have been teaching courses on rise and fall of civilization, except for Islamic and Western civilizations, you simply don't have information about the beginning of any other civilizations in history. These are all imaginative. And therefore, Darwinian theory cannot be applied to understand those civilizations.
A question on the Zoom again, which you said, that it's tradition to talk about LGBT and feminists and all. So this question is coming again from that point of view, from Muhammad Asri. Well, brother, on Zoom people cannot hear. Can you increase the volume? Yeah. So the question is, Muhammad Asri is our student. In your view, does the rise of LGBT movement and ideology in the West have connection with Darwinian worldview?
You see, this so-called LGBT phenomenon is not a new phenomenon in history. It has been there in all civilizations. They handled it differently. But the way it is coming today, and it seems to me that some people are trying to justify it from different, distorting some facts. But this is part of human nature which existed in history, and it has all civilizations have handled it. But the thing is that, again, this is the study of sources, how you study sources. So, to me, it is natural that there will be a couple composed of one male and one female. If you break that, I think you are going against the teachings of history and civilization. So I think it is very difficult to justify any of these ideas.
Yeah. Thank you. Very, very clear that you cannot remove what is natural, which is coupled, and which is found in all histories.
Yeah, I mean, there are demands now that you have to have third or fourth
Gender.
toilets in everywhere. How will you handle it?
Years ago in Sydney.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brother Abdullah Ahsan. It is already going to be 12 almost time. So we will stop here for today. And we have second and the third lecture. So let me announce this first. Next lecture topic is Divine Guidance and Rise of Civilizations and History. Next Thursday afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m. And it will be the same arrangement we'll arrange for the students who are coming from Bombay and also be online. So before we end here today, I would like Professor Bargut to say a few words, and then he will give a presentation, a token of souvenir to Professor Abdullah Ahsan. Yes, Professor, good.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. First of all, let's welcome and express our gratitude to our Professor Abdullah and Ahsan for coming all the way from the US to be with us here in the next 2 weeks. I think that's, we really appreciate his effort and his contributions. I would like to thank all the people who have been with us here since the beginning in the Zoom and YouTube channel, and also our people who are here. Also to thank our Professor, Associate Professor Imtiyaz Yusuf for all his great effort in handling this series of futures of integration of knowledge and civilizational development, which is one of the very important series which we initiated under ISTAC here, so that we provide a platform for scholars, researchers, students, and people outside to think, to deliberate, to study, to raise deep and big, complex questions. Today, what we heard from Prof. Abdullah and Ahsan actually tells us, in many ways, one side of the failure which we have in the contemporary Islamic thought and civilization, brothers and sisters. Until today, after more than 1,400 years, since the Prophet, the last Prophet came, until today, as Muslims, we still don't have a theory on how to interpret history. A theory how we understand how history started from Adam as the first person, maybe 40,000 years ago, and 1,500 or almost 500 since Prophet Muhammad as the last prophet came in with the final book, which is Islam. By nature, by the very virtue of Islam being the last book, there must be an epistemology in Islam, how to interpret history, how we to restructure, reconstruct the whole history of Islam based on a very unified worldview. Here where the great question of looking at history starts. Where is the Islamic worldview of history in the mainstream scholarship, which is dominated by the West in the last 200 years by all these theories of positivism, rationalism, existentialism, Darwinism, relativism, empiricism, and then postmodernism, Derrida, Foucault, Habermas, and all these products you see today, LGBT or nakedness, all these are just simple products of the deep problem in the epistemology of humanity today. So raising the question of worldview as a start is very crucial. I remember Dr. Khalid Blankenship, that great scholar. He has a paper trying to understand history from a Quranic perspective. And I think you read that paper. It's a very good paper. Now, brothers and sisters, what I'm saying this way, I think Islamization of knowledge needs to address this issue. Because this issue, how come Muslims with all this Quranic book, the final book of humanity, we don't have a model or a theory how we have views on philosophy of civilization, on how Islam looks at civilization, but how do we reconstruct the whole history based on the Quranic epistemology? Why the Quran talks about Qisasul Anbiya? Why the stories of prophets huge amount of the Quran is about stories of prophets. It's not to tell people the Asatir al-Awwalin. It's not to tell people what happened in the Ahlul Kahf or no. It's actually epistemologically meant to build an Islamic view of history. So studying the stories of Anbiya is not just for Ibrah, like the story of Yusuf. Where is this Yusuf? In which place? What he did? Who are the people there? What is the culture there? What was the political system there? How he solved it? And look at the Ibrahim, look at Yahya, look at Noah, look at Shu'aib. All this actually is meant to provide us with the methodological guidance of how we understand history and reconstruct history. So brothers and sisters, what Prof. Ahsan opened today is a very important and deep thing, how the Islamic worldview now will reshape our understanding of history, and then Darwinism or they become just simple things, but we have the bigger picture, how we understand history from an Islamic perspective. So that's, I think, the challenge which we need to address. And we cannot address this until we understand the epistemology of the Quran. I just give you one simple thing. It's not a lecture, but one simple thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He sent this Quran, or He sent Prophet Muhammad, مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. Our understanding of history, our understanding of prophethood, our understanding of the history of humanity since revelation started coming to men. I'm not talking about the history of the universe or the creation of the universe millions of years. I'm talking about since Allah said, I'm placing on earth a Khalifa. And that's, as we know it now, is Adam, and come down to earth here to build the Umran, to build the civilization. Since then, until now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a lot of messengers. The hadith says more than 124,000 prophets. What is the role and job and function of these prophets in history? In constructing this history of Tawheed, the history of man. Quran says, I have sent Muhammad, I have sent this book, مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ, acknowledge and endorse that there were prophets before, there were messengers before, and Muhammad is just completing this whole epistemology of prophethood, of the history of humanity. And that history of humanity is actually spread everywhere. 124,000 messengers go to where? And when you really develop the Islamic theory of understanding history, you will find that all history, all humanity is connected in Tawheed. So then the ayah says, that's what is important to me. مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. We acknowledge, we respect, we acknowledge Isa, Musa, all are from one family, all respected, all great, all created history. This is the Qisas al-Anbiya. But the Quran says, and for the first time, this term is used in the Quran. Other than talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His names and attributes as Muhaymin. The Quran says, مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَمُهَيْمِنًا. What is Muhayminan? Muhayminan means this Quran is the mizan, is the measure, is the criteria, is the manhaj to understand history and reconstruct history of man, of universe. That's why all these stories of Anbiya are all actually in epistemological principles, how you understand history, how you reconstruct history. I think in the next lecture of Prof, when he talks about revelation and history, and this, we can go to more details. But I'm talking epistemologically to be clear in our mind that the Quran, and as Muslims, we must be able to build our theory of history regardless of what is Darwin saying or what is this? These are all the people who shaped the whole world based on an epistemology which is one-sided. And that's the truth. That's what you see in the world today. So you student of master PhD here, from this point you start studying history. From the epistemology that unifies the revelation and the reason, that unifies the politics with not the human politics only, but the intervention of God in the history of man and civilization. So, brothers and sisters, these are deep questions. That's what I want ISTAC to address. That's what our students here and scholars address, from pure scientific, objective, critical, and knowledge-based approaches. Forget about politics.
Yeah.
That's a different story. It's not in ISTAC here. But here, it's knowledge, it's learning, it's scholarship, it's depth. So once we get our epistemology clear, our worldview clear, that's very important. Our struggle, our future contribution, it's at the worldview level. And how we translate all the epistemological principles of interpreting history from Islamic Quranic perspective into the different disciplines, history, psychology. Well, that's why this idea of multi and inter and transdisciplinary will become the future of any analysis. You like it or you don't like it. You know why? Because the Quranic epistemology is trans. It creates the mind, which is from the natural science to the human science to the ulum of wahyu to the psychology and all this. You just take one surah, Najm, or any surah in the Quran, how it talks about nature, it talks about man, it talks about soul, it talks about heart, it talks about politics, about action, about values, akhlaq in one verse. So why we are following the Western model where the human is segmented? The mind is something, the senses is something, the body is something, then the soul is something, and it's somewhere else. So we are starting from a worldview and epistemology of understanding the history of man, which is unified. So that's, I think, what is the message that we want to carry from here. It's a very deep discussion needed, and hopefully, inshallah, we can, Prof. Abdullah Ahsan will, inshallah, after the 3 lectures, you can come up with a book or a write-up which will be published and is stuck here, inshallah. And please take these things very seriously. And I think the Quran contains an epistemology and a theory of reconstructing the whole human history. And alhamdulillah, now we have a lot of knowledge, scientific or human science, social science, how now our epistemology reconstruct based on the principles of Islam. So that's the starting point. Thank you, Prof. May God bless you all. And I'm very glad here as the Dean of ISTAC to have this great discussion here. And I really thank all the participants who are on Zoom here. You are all the great supporters of ISTAC. May God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Now I invite Professor Bargut to give a present souvenir to Abdullah.
And after this, we will have all a photo with this great man here.
Yeah.
You will come for this.
And after that, for lunch, we have lunch